So if you take a look at this is fiscal policy, and this is what the government has control over. They have control over how they tax things and how much money they spend. Now, there's a couple things you ought to know about this. When you look at the budget, you see the priorities, right? And I want you to think about this in terms of your own family. When times are good, it's easier to save money. When times are difficult, when you don't have as much money coming in, it's more difficult to save money because you've got to pay for your expenditures. What has happened in the last 20 years or so dramatically is that the government spends money whether times are good or whether times are bad. So when times are bad, we don't have a savings account, an emergency fund to draw from. And we just hit a time that in my lifetime, like I said, about 50-ish years old, and we have gone from the best economy in my lifetime, lowest unemployment rate, the best GDP, to the worst economy in my lifetime. The unemployment rates extremely high, lots of uncertainty. Now, let's go on and talk about fiscal spending. Actually, let's talk about the debt versus the deficit. You ought to be able to understand the difference. The national deficit, so if every month you make $2,000, but you spend $3,000, you have a deficit of $1,000 a month. You have a couple options. What can you do? Oh, you can spend less money, or you can make more money, or some combination. At the end of the year, because you got to pay that extra 1,000 every month. Let's say you haven't changed anything in your life. You put it on your credit card, and that credit card has interest. And before you know it, you have a debt at the end of the year of at least $12,000, but probably much more because of that interest. So right now we are in serious debt. We run a deficit constantly, and then the surplus is, of course, when we take more. I can't imagine when we're going to get there again, because here's the thing. We say when the government says it's going to cut something, what it really means, it's going to cut the increase. So if you were to say, I spend $3,000 a month and I only make 2,000, you would say I'm going to cut 1,000, which means, or 500. So I'm only in a deficit of $500. When the government says it's cutting, what it's really saying is, well, it was supposed to grow by 10% next year. We're only going to let it grow by 7%. So you're still growing. You're just not growing the deficit and debt as fast. So it's just something that I don't think most people understand, and something for you to be aware of as you continue on in life. Monetary policy is the control of the money supply, and that is done by the Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve Bank, we'll talk about this more in a future chapter. The Federal Reserve Bank is the central bank of the United States, and one of the things that they control interest rates of member banks, and all national banks, the big banks, Bank of America, Citibank, Chase, Wells Fargo, all have to belong to the Fed. They do a variety of things, but the ability to control how much or how little money is in the economy is really an important part of what they do. They also facilitate transactions so that people can send and receive money easily, and to purchase goods and services. But the Federal Reserve Bank is a quasi federal entity. It's not. It is the board is appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, but they're in staggering terms. So you never can have one president that appoints them all at one time. And their job is to make sure that the economy stays stable. All right. And I'm going to take you up here to the business cycle. We went from an economic boom into a recession. We are officially in a recession. And what that means is, during a boom, things are humming. Everything's going great. A recession, 2 or more consecutive quarters of decline in the GDP. And what that means is there's a contraction, and people lose their jobs, and people aren't buying things. And that recession lasts long enough, it turns into a depression. And the depression, the issue with the depression is, and we haven't had one since the 1930s, which was a global depression, but it's very difficult to get out of. It's very difficult once you fall into that. You're like, think of it as being in like a bottomless pit where that's really tough to get any kind of traction to get yourself out of. So the goal of the Federal Reserve and both fiscal and monetary policy is to have whatever goes up must come down. The question is, do you want it to come down with a thud, or do you just want it to slowly come down and go back up? That's the question. And that's what they try to, whatever recession we have, they want it to be mild enough that we don't end up in a depression. And then the recovery is, okay, things are looking better, they're moving along, and hopefully we will see a recovery. You may have heard on the news about a V-shaped recovery is the hope. That means that we hit this so hard because of global pandemic, and now all the protests and a lot of the issues that those have created in terms of business are that many small businesses have just opened for a day or two before they've been shuttered again. And most small businesses run on a shoestring budget, meaning they don't have a lot of extra money. Their whole life savings is in that business, and so it makes it very, very difficult. So right now we are in a recession. Hopefully this will be a short-term recession, because the underlying economy for the last couple of years has been really good. And we've had strong GDP growth. We've been renegotiating our trade deals. Those have all been healthy for us. Now, what else do we measure to see how the economy is doing? Productivity. Are we a productive country? Yeah, we really are. We are very productive. And a lot of that is because we have a strong work ethic. Our work in a lot of ways defines us, which has made us the strongest economy in the world, which has allowed us to grow over the last 70, 80 years to be this strongest economy in the world. And the technological advances that we have created have made us more productive per person. Okay, so while the technology, one of the podcasts that I have you listen to is about the Luddites, and I think you'll find that very interesting because the speed of change is happening so quickly. But all our technology has made us far more productive. Okay, let's talk about the CPI and the PPI. And really what we're talking about is inflation. Inflation is the idea that your dollar doesn't buy as much as it used to. And and if you look at our inflation rate, it's actually quite low. Now, I will also put up some other things that will be helpful for you to get context. And I think one of the key things is that you need context. Whenever you look at any number, any idea, you need to have some context as to what it means in relationship to other things. We have a very low rate of inflation. The fear when you go into a recession is that you are going to end up with deflation, meaning that the economy is stagnant. People aren't spending money. People are afraid to buy a new car or a vacuum cleaner, whatever it might be, because they just don't know if they're going to have a job, or maybe they've been laid off temporarily, or perhaps it's permanently and they've got to get a new job. So deflation is a concern. I mean, it's great if you have money because prices go down, but what about those businesses who have to keep lowering their prices? How does it affect them and their profit margins? So, and you can get stuck. The Japanese economy has been in a 25-year cycle of deflation. Their economy has never really fully recovered because they're very high savers. And so there's always that balance between saving and spending, because if you save all your money, then people who provide goods and services, they're not able to sell you anything. and the economy doesn't grow. However, if you don't save your money, then you have no emergency fund for yourself. Uh, Stagflation is when the economy is slowing, prices are going up anyhow. They're not as concerned about that at this very moment, but this is something that the Federal Reserve watches very closely, because once you hit inflation, it's very tough to come out of that. How do we measure inflation? How do we know what our dollar can buy? So we look at something called the CPI, and that is the Consumer Price Index. Somebody from the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor actually, goes out every month, they all throughout the country, and they see how much of a basket of goods and services that they look at that's in the CPI, and they say, did it go, a loaf of bread, air travel, rents, did it go up or down? And so that's what they focus on. And that gives you your inflation rate. And what might be true in Sacramento, California might not be true in Reno, Nevada, or in, Des Moines, Iowa, or we're a big country, or Savannah, Georgia. And so they look at all of this to give you an aggregate. The PPI, and by the way, keep in mind that I'll give you an example. My mom is big on, she measures inflation by how much is she paying for gas and onions and tomatoes and things when she goes to the grocery store. While those prices may have gone up, like for instance, we saw during this pandemic, the rush to buy toilet paper and wipes, and people were paying a lot of money for things that just 2 weeks earlier had been easily available. But then you think about the fact that technology has become so much cheaper. My first computer was a Mac, and I bought it in 1989 for $3,000, and it had no hard drive. It had 2 floppy disks, if you know what a disk is. And now, a computer way more powerful, I could buy for $200. So some things come down, some things go up. Think about flat screen TVs and how cheap those have become. And, so we measure all of that together to give us the aggregate rate. And the PPI is the raw materials that the businesses buy to make their products. And that measures the prices at the wholesale level. So what else do we look at? Well, we look at unemployment. And as I just said to you, we saw a massive rise in unemployment, like numbers we haven't seen before. It was just unreal. And it was not because of anything in the economy. It was because people were forced to shut down their businesses and lay off all their employees. Very difficult. But hopefully, as things are beginning to open up, I know they are in our area, and it will still be a new normal because of social distancing and the amount of cleanliness and that they're going to have to engage in. It will still be, but there's a lot of pent-up demand. I was driving the other day and I saw a long line outside of Home Goods and TJ Maxx, and I thought, my gosh, how much stuff do you need from this store? I don't think of it as a store that people need things, but in any case, point is, people are hungry to go back out and buy things and live their lives and go out to restaurants and so forth. But if you're unemployed, that's a real issue for you. So there's 4 kinds of unemployment. There is frictional, which is normal. You're coming in and out of the market. You just graduated college and you don't have a job yet. You left your job and you're looking for a different one, a better one. That is a normal coming in and out. Seasonal unemployment. We're in an area where we have agriculture, so obviously there's seasonal unemployment with that. Most stores will hire for retail stores for the Christmas season and then lay off the majority of those hires in January, February, when things have slowed up again. So every industry has some kind of seasonal aspect to it, but those are kind of obvious examples for you. Cyclical unemployment, well, that's what we're in right now, right? We had the lowest unemployment rate that we've ever seen, down and I mean beyond full employment, and now we've gone down to a recession where millions of people are unemployed, and that is the business cycle. And hopefully it will be a very tepid recession, and we'll come back up. And the last one is the toughest one. That's structural unemployment. That is where you no longer have the skills for what the work requires. So years ago, they passed the Welfare to Work Act, and we had to get these certificates to get people employed that perhaps had never been employed, if they had a child at a young age and so forth. So, or when the defense base closed up here in McClellan, it also led to a lot of people who were, their skills that they were being paid well for were no longer needed because we weren't making planes and fixing planes and so forth there. So they now had to be retrained for new skills. So that is much tougher because there's a mismatch between what employers want and need and what prospective employees, the skills that they have. So that is difficult if it's based on that. Luckily, we're in cyclical unemployment, not structural at this time. So we look at unemployment, we look at fiscal and monetary policy to see how we're doing. And this is a nice chart just to show you. And I want you to look up here how high that was. This was during the last recession, the housing bubble. And at some point, if you'd like, I will go over that with you. But in any case, and then where we were so low, and it's only to 2017, and it went even lower. We were down around 2.5% unemployment when this happened. So, hopefully we will see those again. Okay, so let me go on from that. GDP. You should know what GDP is. It's basically all the value of the goods and services produced in this country at the present time. And it doesn't matter if it's an American company, a Japanese company, a Bolivian company. If it's produced in the United States, we measure it within our GDP, and it is a really important measure because it tells you how the economy is doing. It is the sum of all goods and services produced in our borders. Okay. I'm going to stop here. I will come back and continue talking about the mixed economies and the different social, economic, political systems, and as well as talk to you about the international stuff and how that relates.